Okay, give me just a second here. And yes, my voice sounds a bit strange nowadays, or currently. I'll explain in just a moment. But basically, let me get that up. And ka-ding. Let me turn this just a little bit that way. Actually, that's not a good thing. We need to have this at its normal resolution. Yeah. Okay. And welcome, everyone. Actually, the next thing I need to do is I need to okay. Now, what's going to happen here tonight is I've got something else to paint. And I finished the ones that I started on Sunday, by the way. And have a boatload left to paint. For example, I finished, well, if it'll zoom, arg, advanced, autofocus is off, so I finished the Bore Rider. Let me pull it back. Let's turn autofocus on and make it easier. I'll do this with it. Yeah. Now, the tint is a little off. His shoulders, the clothing underneath his shoulders is a lot more purple, for example. But yeah, I finished all four of the of our little. Yeah. You'll notice that each of them has a different color for the ring around the base. The reason for that, there we go. You can see the mail and the rope better now. And I have a whole lot more left to go. Most of which I haven't even primed yet. Like this particular absolutely terrified primitive boar rider. He chose the wrong boar. And I'm missing one of these because I could have sworn I put 4 up. Oh. Anyway. A whole lot of others. But like I was saying, you'll notice that they have different colored rims around them. The idea being that each one of the different colored rims represents a different unit or troop type. For example, both of the archers, both the one I printed in piecemeal and assembled before painting. Oh, and yeah, this is a lot more, it's a lot more, this is showing up as blue, but it's actually more like grape. and the grape on his back is more like a pinkish purple. But this is the one I printed out and assembled like a puzzle. This is the one that I printed out as one piece. And I think this one fuses better. You'll notice that I've done things like I've given their well, pull back there. Their mouths, nose, and cheeks have a bit of a reddish tint, but their chins and jawline have a slightly more bluish. Yeah. It's funny, they don't look bluish. Anyway, that was that. This is this. And no. What are you doing? Let me guess. Yeah. I have a fuzz butt. As if you couldn't tell. And I can't exactly paint with you up here. Anyway. Both the archers have the same shade of purple rim. The dual-wielding savage, because the savage orcs have a darker purple, and then the sword and board guy has a medium blue. It's actually a medium blue. The camera's a little blown out right now. And the boar rider has a pale blue rim around his base. Now, you'll also note one more thing. I note that I am now missing one of my orcs. Anyway, some of them, new ones, have square bases instead of round. That's deliberate. You see, a lot of war games will use these square bases to help maintain unit integrity. You know, you base to base to base. Also, you're not considered to be in melee combat with your enemy until your base is touching his. That kind of thing. With a square base, easy to judge. With a round base, not so much. Anyway, this obviously is a super... Let me take my ring off. This obviously is a super heavy armored orc. Wearing full plate everything, pretty much. There's a few areas where he would have skin and cloth visible, but for the most part he's heavy armor, with a little skull on his belly. So, I went ahead and primed him, but I did a basic version of what's called zenithal priming, which means if you look underneath him, even directly in light, he's pitch black, because he was painted black, and then I sprayed at a 45-degree angle with the gray. Then gave it a wash of my armor wash. That picked out all the details nicely. There. Now you'll also notice that this horn didn't print perfectly. Neither did the back of his sword. Half his hand is missing and so is his pommel. That's because you've got to be careful and you've got to be paying attention when you set up the supports for your figure, when you print. Now, what I'm doing is I'm experimenting with a new way of doing steel armor. And by that, I don't mean a new way of sculpting it, I mean a new way of painting it. Yeah, it could be battle damage. Anyway, so what I have now is a basic shade from black to mid-gray with a wash. So it's completely non-metallic right now. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pick up this gray, ash gray. It is from the Army Painter line. It just happens to be a nice, slightly lighter than medium gray gray. Put a couple drops in the little divot. Just a few, not a lot. And we are going to be dry brushing this entire figure with that light gray. So we dab the brush into it, brush most of it off onto the paper that I'm using down here as a, well, not exactly a palette, but close to it. And then we're just going to dry brush the whole thing until it starts picking up all that detail. Even though there's some areas, such as his belt and the trim underneath his scale, that won't be metal, we're still just going to do the whole thing. We'll go back in after we're done and deal with the non-metallic parts, which would include the hands, since that's the only skin actually visible. It's assumed by me, and I'm the one that made it, that what's visible at the shoulders, right there, and at the inside of the elbows, right here, is not skin, but the arming coat underneath it. Because I don't care how stupid you are, you're not going to put on plate without some kind of padding. Because if you don't, then you may as well not be wearing plate, because every bit of the impact that you take will still get transferred directly to you. It's a matter of, do you want to be alive or not? Not a matter of, oh, I can take it. So even orcs wear padded arming coat, although theirs is probably crudely made. Now on the legs, I'm brushing up just to make sure I catch the bottom edge of all of those leg plates and the sabatons and that. So it's just whoop, burp, 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 burp. Same thing here. Okay. Now, right now you really can't tell as there's as much difference, simply because it's gray on gray. You can kind of tell around, like, say, the edges of the jaw plate here. But the next thing up, dun 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 dun. Gotta rinse off the brush. Now remember, one brush for colors and inks, and one cup and a different cup for metallics, and it really comes into play here, simply because of how many. And yes, I lay it against the side of the cup like that and twist it, even though it's a flat brush. And then I brush the palm of my hand to get rid of the extra water. Now, next up, after ash gray, comes, yeah, this is ghost gray. It is not going on pure. You'll notice that because I'm dry brushing, I am not watering these paints down. I'm actually adding this ghost gray in about 2.5 drops of it to the ash. This ghost gray is almost but not quite white, by the way. It's Viejo game color. I'm going to mix them together. Yes, you can mix paints from different companies together as long as they use the same medium. I've heard rumors that you can mix gel medium paints like Scale 75 with regular acrylics, but I do not know, and I don't think I would trust it. And once again, I'm brushing most of it off, but even more so. And I'm only going across the uppermost edges of plates and areas like that. The area that would be the sharpest and shiniest. And what happens next is, again, thanks to an experiment. An experiment in doing full armor. Because it worked with how I did the weapons for one of the other characters. We're going to get back to the weapons here in just a bit. But for right now, we're just going to go ahead and include it in our dry brushing. And the only part of the legs we're going to do with this are the kneecaps and the toes. We are also going to very lightly come up the back of the scales. Okay, and across the top of this part of the belt here, or the waist plate. Okay. Now, we have some pretty sharp edge lining just from being what it is. And it's going from nearly white to black, but it's dull, it's drab, it's gray. It's not metal. So what we're going to do next involves a mix. One I made earlier. I'm calling it a metallic glaze. I took my glaze mix. I took some shining steel type paint. To be exact, I mixed a bit of shining silver and what's the other one from Viejo? No, that's not the one I was reaching. No. Sorry, shining silver from Army Painter and plate mail metal from Army Painter. They get kind of a medium gray little glaze. And what we're going to do we are going to take a very, very thin amount on a much more controllable brush. I mean, it's also an older brush, one that's destined for the dry brush lines. And we're just going to sit here and wipe it on. The end result is that we will keep our shading, but gain the metallic look. While making the recesses and the crevices less metallic. And this gives us what's called ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is where something is so close to something else that it starts to actually shadow it. It's also called self-shadowing in some older games, because they thought that people would be too stupid and go, ambient what? But no, the truth is it's self-shadowing. Okay. If you look at the helmet, oh, let me. It's starting to look metallic already. You can also see right here and right here, the voxels are slightly visible. That's the kind of artifact you get from resin printing. Now, right here, just looking at it, it doesn't look metallic from your point of view because the camera is not really picking it up. This is the kind of thing that's really best picked up by a actual high-resolution photograph. But it very clearly looks metal. Man, it looks so metal in person. You also note that I'm not putting it absolutely everywhere, simply because some of this metal will become bronze or brass. Probably brass. It's easier to do. Then we're going to do it onto the buttocks. And then onto the leg. The other leg. What this effectively is just a metal glaze. And where normal glaze is intended to tint what it's going over, all this is intended for is to metallicize what it's going over. So, for example, I'm going ahead and putting a nice large thick coat right on the top of the back and right on top of the helmet. And again, it's kind of hard to pick up the pure metallic. This is nighttime. I don't have great lighting in here. It's better than it often is. Let me put that down there. Okay, that might be a bit bright. Let me go ahead and turn those off, and then yeah. Now, right now it looks a little rough. Once I put in the gloss varnish over the parts that are going to be shiny, it will look a lot smoother. Again, you can see the printing artifacts on the sword. Come on. There, yeah, there we go. So what we're going to do, we're going to let most of the rest of that dry, but it's time to paint the sword. We're going to start with this, the swords, plural. We're going to start with this one. We're not using the same method exactly, because this is going to be a combination of wet blending and the technique I just described. So what we need to do is find, it's a uniform gray, it's another gray we need. Where is the dark gray? Uniform gray, ash gray, which is the medium light. We got uniform gray is a medium dark from Army Painter, and ash gray from Army Painter, ghost gray from Viejo. But I'm looking for Necromancer Cloak from Army Painter, because that's a nice dark gray without being too dark. There is a color in the set, the 51 paint set, Dark Stone. This is a dark brown. a dark gray brown. Necromancer Cloak is the shade we're looking for. What we're going to do is we're going to paint the blades this Necromancer Cloak. Just a straight up flat blade. I'm keeping it kind of thick on this for the sole purpose that we want to kind of cover up those printing artifacts on the blade, because it was kicked back like that. Okay. So, take it. Get the brush just a little damp while we do this. You still don't want to leave brush strokes. And we're just going to paint the entirety of the blade with this mixture, or this paint rather. And do the same thing. We're going to make sure it goes into all the little nooks and crannies. Okay. And then the blade on this sword. The back portion of it we're going to paint like brass. Or I will paint brass. The only green that will be visible in this entire green skin is his hands. But yeah, if there's a section on your print, on your miniature, that did not fully print the way you wanted it to, like for example his hand and that horn, don't worry about it. If it's intended for an army for a war game, you can always say it's battle damage. If it's intended for a roleplay, most people aren't going to look twice. The only time you got to worry about it is if you're intending it for competition, or, like me, you're going to be using it to take photos of for promo purposes. Which means this guy is going to be photographed like that. Or like that. Yeah. Now, here we go. Now, I'm going to rinse out this brush. You can see right now that those swords look a lot flatter than the rest of the figure. Also, the figure's base, the texture that I decided to go with for the bases for all of these orcs. Let me use this one because this one's my favorite of them. It's actually where some ancient walls and roads got half buried in the Badlands. And yes, his little symbol on his shield is supposed to represent some kind of like little tribal rune or something like that. Even the big guys have a similar collapsed stone wall / cobblestone road in dirt and sand. If I was going to be doing these for actually be putting them out on the table, I'd also get some tufts, whether the citadel or whether the tufts, the static grass tufts, whatever, and put little tufts into the sandy areas, probably tufts of dead yellow grass. And that little side story did not completely dry the blades, so we're just going to wait just a little bit longer. Well, I throw a couple ideas at you, and y'all please tell me what y'all think. Okay? Idea number 1. I'm almost certainly gonna put these guys up on Kickstarter as the Green Tide. The basic product, without any of the stretch goals, is 187 pieces to make your own orcs. After that, there will come, and I'm not sure what order, goblins. Where these guys are multiple pieces, the goblins will simply be top, bottom, base. And they'll be relatively simple. Then there will be siege weapons. Catapults, ballista, chariots. Or say, let's call them war machines. Chariots. Imagine this guy riding as number 2 man in a chariot pulled by 2 of the Tuskers. Yeah, there. That's probably the best representation of the fade that I did on the fur. The nose and towards the top of the hump is a brighter yellow than the bottom towards the back. You'll also notice that on this one, I also gave him a little bit of rust on his armor and on the metal plates on his shield. Yep. Yeah. Okay, so the swords are for the most part dry now. The left-hand sword won't be as intricate as the right hand for what I'm about to do. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to assume... Yeah. Anyway. Alright. So goblins is first. Then comes war machines. Then comes characters. The characters include either the war boss or the grand shaman riding a wyvern. Okay, now we're going to take the darker medium gray from the army banner called uniform gray. We're going to put in just a drop and a half in there. And we're going to add in 1 drop of my little glaze medium. For the record, in total of 20 parts, that's 13 of matte medium from Golden, 6 distilled water, and 1 Liquitex Flow Aid. And we're just going to barely squeeze a little bit on there, because all we want this for mostly is we want it to extend a little bit and to be a little bit there, and just a little bit transparent. Now, I'm going to focus on the blade. Now what's going to happen is, the area that is at the tip and the base of the flat of the blade will get this, and then kind of, you notice I just wiped it off and kind of brought down just a bit and then blended back in that way. A little bit of water on the brush to kind of smooth that area right here. Oh. Okay, now look at that. You can see how I've got it fading to that black there. That's just the base. It's going to be extreme. We're going to do the opposite here on the arc of the blade, on the sharp part of the blade. What's the word I'm looking for? The bevel. Yeah, there we go. Also, this needs to be. And then I get my brush a little bit wet. We're going to kind of pull towards that section. This is just to make it more of a smooth transition between the colors. Okay. Okay. We're going to do it on the other side now, but inverted. Now, the tip over here, on the bevel, the ends are going to be what's going to have the medium gray. Okay. And then I'm going to use it and blend in. Okay. And then make sure I come back in and bring that up to make sure it touches the edge of the bevel. Okay. We're going to do something similar on this. Except we're going to come and we're going to leave the tip flat. Because we're going to paint the entire top of the bevel on both sides. This color. Touching the water. Y'all will get a chance to see how this turns out on a better camera just a bit. As in, like, well before I actually get this going. Get it sent off to Kickstarter. Now we're gonna come straight up the back. And right up there. Okay. Now, I'm going to rinse this off. I'm going to pivot again. And we're switching to ash gray. So I take it this means that you like the idea of goblins, war machines, and character models. Actually, I take that back. Goblins, then before the war machines, the villager huts, and an orcish altar to go with it. Then we have the war machines, and then the elite characters. No. Let's have the elite characters be the number 3, and then the village itself be number 4. And then we're gonna go ahead. Get that brush wet. We make this in a slightly smaller area. Okay. And it's starting to get the look that I want. This isn't exactly wet blending. This is a kind of a more of a speed paint sheet version of wet blending. It just happens to be the one that works best for what I'm using it for right now. Also, about now, we're going to paint the back. Now, we're not going to paint that any other color. But now we have that one. If it wasn't so, if the light wasn't active like this, it would be a lot easier to see what we're doing. Okay, we need to kind of blend that a little bit there. Okay, now we're doing it down displayed. And by doing this, what we're doing is we're giving it a pseudo reflection effect. We're simulating whatever else is out there besides the gaming table. we are also going to go ahead and paint in the top edges of this blade because it is a flat edge. We're painting it in with this ash gray because it's reflecting the sharp top. And it's almost perfectly vertical, so it'd be about even colors on both sides. And then we're going to give it a little bit here. And then we're painting the tips, the upper parts of these scallops. Okay. Now, we're going to let that dry again in just a few minutes. And we're going to go ahead and switch to that. I should note, we are not done with the rest of the armor. We're just not going to do what we need to do with the armor until after we put that on the blades. There's a very good chance I'll get this work done entirely before the show's over. Meanwhile, let me remind people that I am, in fact, broadcasting. Okay. And that's that one. And there we go. That should do. We should get some more people in here soon. Now, this will probably get a better look for what it actually ends up looking like. Come on, you stupid, silly little... Yeah. Yeah, that's a closer shade. All that, yeah. Anyway. Put this back on up top, just to give it a little bit more light while I paint. Now we're going to take this Ghost Gray from Viejo Game Color. I always shake it. Always shake your paint. And if you've got an agitator, wait until you can hear the agitator rattle a couple times. The more times, the better. Okay. Now what we're going to do, this is going to be a very small amount at the absolute edges. Actually, this particular paint needs some water. That's an old bottle that I got from a store that had bought it as part of a buyout of another store. So I have no idea how old, but it is starting to get a little thick. Okay. And then just a little bit to get the wet sides. That needs to get pushed up. I had a little bit spill down onto the bevel of the blade. And in the process, all I had to do was just make sure my blade was dry, and it would sponge it right up. Now what I'm doing is I'm starting away and drawing towards the rest of the color. Because what that'll do is that'll leave the puddle at the end of the stroke. Okay. Now we're going to do the other side. By doing this, what we are doing, not only are we simulating the reflections that it would have, we're also making a distinct border at the edge. That will be a lot easier for us to pick at and exaggerate with true silver paint when it comes time. Now remember, this is actually a speed paint. Well, just for the sake of it, I'm not doing a full. This is just quickie versions of the techniques that would be used in a full display model. Okay. And now we're going to do it to this blade. I can hear an almond milk commercial in the living room, and all I can think of nowadays when I hear it is an old man saying, "Almonds ain't got nipples, they ain't supposed to give milk." Then we're going to put a little bit right on the tips there. We're going to do the same thing here. Put down a little bit of layer of the wet stuff. And scoop up that went down into the divot. And then we're going to just a line across the center. And then we're going to bring it in and blend it all together. And a little bit on the tips inside the scallops. Then we're going to take this. We're actually going to draw kind of near the bevel. Okay. Now, we're going to let that dry. I'm also going to push down. I got the wrong kind of blue tack this most recent time. Alright. And while we're waiting, I can go ahead and glance around and see what happened to the missing work. Which work is missing? Okay. 2, 3. Did it fall down here? I don't think it did. Hmm. Ah, well. I'll dig it out later. Anyway, so. Ooh. I stopped painting for a good while from 2003 to 2018. So I was faced with that very decision. I ended up getting the Army Painter Mega Box 51 paints for about $90. Then I simply bought a bottle or two of Vallejo every time I went to the hobby shop for my weekly D&D games. So I guess you could say I suggest that. What are you doing? Ugh. Yes. I have a fuzz butt. What are you doing? Huh? You know. You know that if I'm painting, you're not supposed to get up here. Because I don't want you eating the paint. No crazy kid. Yes. Look at that. Just following the ear scritches. Yeah. Okay, fuzzball. Down you go. Good boy. Okay. Now, as we look at it, it looks like that's mostly dried. So what we're going to do, we're going to come back around here. Is this still wet? Yeah, it is. I've got that little metallic glaze. I'm going to just mix it a bit to make sure it's still good and glazy. I'm going to very carefully paint it onto the sword so that the end result is that the blade is only slightly obscured by the paint, but it keeps the shading. Okay, now it ends up being a bit more subtle than I had expected, because I think because this paint is a little, the glaze that I made wasn't quite thin enough and not quite silver enough. Okay, and then under here. Then we're going to do the same thing to this blade. All we're doing is, this is just to give it a metallic sheen. so that the shading is that of the shades of gray below it. For those who aren't here, what this is basically a mix that I'm painting that I made of my glaze medium and some medium strength metallic paints like a silver and a steel. And that was a mistake. But the end result is that it will end up giving us that shading that we did for the shine while still looking metallic in person. Vallejo is usually about $3.99 for one of these bottles. These bottles hold 17 milliliter. By comparison, this is the size of a typical Games Workshop bottle. This is only 12 milliliters. Okay? And this is closer to $5. These are cheaper, better paint in my opinion, and hold more per bottle. And they're dropper bottles, not these horrible cap bottles that build up paint in here that prevents you from fully closing it, and it ends up drying out, and you got to make sure that you 3 times the maintenance on the bottle than you would on equivalent paints. Okay, so once this has dried on the swords, we are then going to go and use another Vallejo special. This. The intent behind metal medium. Let's see, you can either paint it directly on or mix 50-50 to color with a color to make a metallic version of that color. It will make it paler. This is also not extremely opaque, but it is perfect for edge highlighting metal areas, including the point where the bevel meets the blade on both of these swords. Or let's call them weapons. Once we do that, actually, let's go ahead and get that out of the way. After we do that, we'll work on the bronze and brass areas of our buddy. Always shake up the bottle. That's how you get a strong grip. There's other ways, but it's impolite. We're going to put a couple drops in here. Beautiful. By itself, it almost looks like a white pearl, but it's actually nothing but matte medium and the metallic flakes. We're not going to use this. We're going to use an actual liner brush. I can find it. Yeah. Well, let's. Wow. And do 2 flats. That's number 10 spotter. Well, this is a round, but it's close. And then just going to go ahead and use this directly on the edges. Kind of like if it was black, we'd be drawing the outlines on a classic pen and ink sketch. We're using the side of the brush on the edges here.
That night Bob is 300 miles away on business in Greenville, California. A traveling vendor selling hats and t-shirts at local fairs and sporting events. Son Robert Jr. is with him. Others back in Vegas. The eldest, Brandon, at home.
Everything's good. Everything's happy.
Here's how Crystal says it all played out. Back in that parking lot, she takes the wheel, delicately maneuvering the car, gliding in every turn.
I was just like, okay, I'm getting the hang of it.
Then the lesson moves from the parking lot to the neighborhood's main street.
Okay.
Brandon, stop.
This is a point where I probably won't be talking as much because it's very simple repeating of the same strokes all over.
She's going at a snail's pace when suddenly an impatient driver appears in the rear view.
There's a silver car, like on the other side. He was right.
Okay, and then here.
And he frozen on us, and I honked the horn.
That honk of the horn, something we've all done, could change everything.
So then you pull up here.
She turns right, and then right about here.
When Crystal says that silver car suddenly sideswipes her.
And we had to stop really hard. What was the size? I didn't recognize when she
Okay.
I was really scared. And
I'm coming up here. I'm more careful with these blades than I will be with the armor.
He says, when I killed
I'll go ahead and let you know that.
In a panic, Crystal says they flee the scene. But what happens next is a puzzle we piece together. Everyone agrees sometime after 11 o'clock, two cars barrel down Mount Shasta Circle to the end of the cul-de-sac where the Myers live. That old Buick driven by Tammy and a four-door silver sedan driven by a mystery man in hot pursuit with a gun.
You heard the shots.
yeah, I was looking and I heard the shot.
Did you know she had been hit?
Yeah, I was screaming. I said, Mommy's been shot. Mommy's been shot.
Brandon, her eldest son, remembers running to his mother's side as that silver sedan flees the scene.
I was just screaming at Mom.
And there we go.
Brandon was telling me to stay there. Because she was closing her eyes.
She's hit in the head. A frantic Brandon dials 911, and at 11:34, Tammy's rushed to a nearby hospital.
And there we go for that one. As you can see, it kind of it's hard to see on the camera. Let me go ahead.
In California, Bob Myers gets Brandon's backstory over the phone. A distraught Crystal.
Nothing I've bought that I would consider 100% useless, but there's a large number of things I would consider 100% overpriced. Case in point is Laman Medium. There's no way I would ever buy Laman Medium because you get the same if you just go out and buy Golden Medium for almost close to a tenth of the price. Actually, wait a minute. Let me see. What's the math on that? Laman Medium is a $5 bottle of 12 mil. Golden Medium is $12 for 247 mil. Can someone please do the math for me for how many cost per mil? And then once again, we're going side of the brush along the edge of the blade, the sharp point. Okay. And then laying lengthwise along the line. Okay. Now, we're going to do it simply a little bit easier on parts of the armor here. I will say there are some things that I would say I would never use. Actually, I should correct myself. There's very few things I would never use, but there are plenty of things that I would rarely use. And one of them comes in this kit from Army Painter. This, as it's, oh come on. As it says, it's an effects paint to simulate glistening blood. Oh, come on. Focus. It's an effects paint to simulate blood. Yeah. I've used it on very rare occasions, but not something I would regularly use. That being said, there are probably people out there who would regularly use it. Just because, well, they have, for example, a vampire army. Or they just like blood and gore. You know? Alright, we're going to bring it down across the edge of the faceplate just to sharpen that edge a bit. I should say the mouth plate. And then the eye socket. And this eye socket. And then on the teeth, and then the top and back of the eye sockets. Then we're going to try and draw up the top of the waist plate. And a little bit of sharpness on the center of the knee. And we're going to the back. We're going to touch up the top of this. And the back of the helmet. There. Remember, keep your metallic brush water separate from your regular brush water. Okay. Now, next step is the brass/bronze areas. These will be a lot easier to deal with. Let me make sure I have my camera set for autofocus. Okay. Okay. Now, here's another Viejo game color. Oh, come on. Yeah. Stop that autofocus. Tinny Tin from Game Color. This actually ends up being more of a very dark bronze. And it's a great thing to put on as your base coat for bronze. Gonna dollop on the bed. And a droplet of the glaze mix. Kitty is comfy. Anyway, where are you going? Oh, baby. Up! Fuzz bucket. She decided it was time for a snack. And hello, Al. Thank you for tuning in. I guess this would be a good time to remind everyone who is watching this after the fact, in the recorded version, to please like and subscribe and hit the bell icon and stuff like that. And as this says right here, any cubic photon is like a magical miniature making machine. Okay. Wipe my brush off so we're only putting on the mix. We're going to put this all over the pommel of the swords. Pommels, and in the case of the big curvy one, we're also going to be putting it on the piece that's along the back here. Actually, this brush needs to go away because this is a dry brush. I need to be using... Where is... There we go. There it is. Get your brush a little bit damp just so that it works well with capillary action. Okay. We don't have to worry too much about multiple coats of this because we're going to be going over it with a different color as a dry brush. Now, before I say anything else about these figures, the sections that I pointed out as not being flesh or metal, the underarm, the trim for his mail, oops, always be ready to wipe that away with water. There we go. That worked. Anyway, the trim on his mail, they're going to be shades of blue, because all these orcs I'm painting are going to have shades of purple or blue or reddish purple on their cloth bits. Okay, so I'm going to come in here, paint this on. Already losing a damn hair.
While police search for the person who gunned down Tammy Myers, the family comes to grips with
A single hair that is coming loose from your brush is the most annoying thing. Okay. Now.
just hours earlier, police announced a stunning discovery, one that paints a much different picture of an elevated monster. A slick piece in Myers'
Okay. Hold on a second. Okay. Alright. I would say that a lot of the training that goes into being a good 2D artist, like anatomy and color theory, really do. The brush technique itself, I doubt that it's 100%, but there's probably a good bit of it that would transfer over. The thing to remember is, from the point of view of someone who's used to painting on canvas, this has more in common with paint by the numbers than it does with what they do. I mean, when you're painting something this small, you can't do the draw from the elbow techniques. You know, you can't do that, which is what they teach. This is all very fine control. So I would say that it's not as much as some might expect, but more than some would think. That's the best way to put it, yeah. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make the inner part of the face paint here, this bronze.
Brandon claims that, he only went with his mom because she asked him to, and he tried to hold her back or restrain her. But in the end, he got his gun, he got in the car, and he went out looking for people.
Okay. Now, oh, let's also do let's do the skull on the belly as bronze. Okay. So now he's got a little belly piece. We're going to let that dry completely. And let me test. Let's turn the autofocus now. There we go. Now it's working. So I could pick up, for example, this skeleton bone. There we go. Yeah, it's working now. Hey. Hey, Kitty, what you doing? What you doing, little baby girl? Alright. While we're waiting on the paint to dry, we'll have a study of the comparative anatomy of a whisker from a cat. I did not know, until we got this little princess here, that cats shed their whiskers. There we go. As you can see, it is thicker at the end than it is at the tip. Also, our black cats have black whiskers. Near the tip, it's pretty stiff, really stiff. About halfway down, it's about like fishing line. And at the tip, it's like a paintbrush. Yeah, a whole lot of cat whiskers. Right. Okay, let's take a gander. Nope. You eventually learn how to tell. Carlton, no. No, little buddy. Nope. Go. Chew. Go on. Be about your business, little fuzz. Anyway. So now we're just going to go to Old Gold by Vallejo Model Color. As you can see from here, I need to shake it up a bit. You can probably hear the clicking of the agitators. And move it up. And we're not going to put it into the divot, we're going to put it onto space between the divots right there. I don't think you can see it, but let's, there. You can see the little, right there you can see the size of the droplet. It's probably about, there was 2 drops from this, so it ended up flattening out to about 8 millimeters. Now, we're going to go back to this sucker, since this is the falling apart brush. We're not going to we're going to start off with a bit of a dry brush over the areas, but a really kind of a loaded dry brush. Okay. I should also note that I've heard it said that if you want it to look dry and dirty, wash then dry brush. If you want it to look wet or clean, dry brush then wash. Because what happens is, dry brushing gives a dusty look, and a wash smooths that dusty look out. So if you put the dry brush on top of the wash, you have that dusty, the dusty thing is unstopped, untrammeled. Whereas if you put the wash on top of the dry brush, well, yeah. Now let's dry brush here. I probably used far too much gold onto my palette. It could have gotten away with half as much or less. Okay, now we got that dry brushed. Next step is, after we rinse off the brush, let it dry, and then we're going to use, again from the Army Painter set, Flesh Wash. This is kind of, when you compare it to the Reichland Flesh Shade from Citadel, the Reichland Flesh Shade is a little redder, whereas the Flesh Wash is a bit more olive. Both of them are simply light brown washes. And what we're going to be doing with it, first we're going to be going over the gold. That'll help smooth out the dry brush area. It is now 9:30. What I'm going to do after I do this is I'm going to go and take care of the Surcoat area. I'm just going to put a single drop right there. Just a single droplet of this. I'm then going to use this brush, dampen it a little bit so that capillary action gives it the normal effect. Brush most of it off, but not all. And then go back over everywhere that we have painted bronze/brass as a bit of a final touch.
His Instagram account is full of photos of what appear to be drugs.
By all accounts, Mouch is a wannabe gangster rapper, low-level drug dealer known on the streets as Baby G, the kind of guy who ends up either famous or in jail. In this case, coke. But his close friend Caitlin Christian sees him more as a lost child.
And then we come on down here, down the blade where we put that gold on the bracing.
Was he in trouble as a kid? I don't believe so. He wasn't a violent person. I believe that there's a void when a parent's not there. But I don't think he was in trouble the way people know.
Mouch may be an unusual Hollywood figure, and Detective Clifford Hogg is happy to oblige.
Okay, and coming up the back of it.
I just need good advice on your rights, and then I want to talk about it. All right, the other actor remains silent.
Actress Brenda Swan,
So, tell me about her.
with us, our home, trust us.
You'll be cool with this, aren't you?
Okay.
Detective Hogg starts pulling the string.
In your mind, what's this all about? Tell me.
Well, you guys picked it. I did something.
Okay. Now.
Just a flathead who lets it light up at Hampton Park. Curiously, the park just across the street from the junior high school St. Myers was
Let's
named
bring it in and let it adjust.
when Mouch told
Yeah, here we go.
Tammy's murder, he was hanging out at this guy's house. Remains unframed.
Now, what we have left to paint on this guy, besides the base, of course. Hello, Mark! We have to paint the Under Armour bits. We have to paint the hands, the belt. And I'm going to wait in the buckle until after I paint the rest of the belt, because there's brown deep in there. And then the trim. The trim, same color as the underplates. And then we have the base, which, much like the bases for the figures over here, come on, is fallen cobblestone and Badlands earth. Oh, come on. It's,
Everybody's trying to see you do the right thing. But everybody realizes that
yeah.
you may have had a mistake that night. Okay? And the fact that you sought out Amy,
Yeah.
that lets me know that this was really bothering you.
Now, for the underparts, we're going to go with blue for this guy. And we're going to go with a medium dark blue. So we're starting with this ultramarine blue. It's a really, really dark shade. It's one of the ones that comes in the Army Painter set. And again, because there's not a lot being used, we're not going to put it, and it's not a wash, we're not going to put it into a divot. We're going to put just one drop there. Now, we have a 10-aught round brush. You don't have to use one that small. I really don't like using really large brushes. This particular paint is already rather thin, which is why I did not thin it down. That's not a function of that color from Army Painter. It's a function of my bottle. Under normal circumstances, I would not be painting on a unthinned paint like this. unless that paint was very, very thin to begin with.
He says the cars separate when he starts heading home, but as he turns through the street, suddenly they are once again face to face.
Go back, passing your house, with their arms out, everything, and passing your house.
Ouch. Kennedy's follows that.
Okay, we look up upside down. There's a little bit right here. You'll notice I'm actually holding it by the cap, not by the miniature.
Do you think he had any idea that it was Teddy Myers in that car?
No.
I wholeheartedly in my soul.
Then
You know, you can tell it's
we go ahead and paint the inside of the elbow.
he didn't even know if anyone had been struck at this point, let alone moving the vehicle yet again.
After unloading his nostalgia leaves the things Sandy needs to tend to his family, it's only days later, Jason says, they both realize he may have just destroyed one.
What was his reaction when he realized it was Teddy?
Not immediate remorse. Like he could not
Okay.
believe this how it happened. How did it go from being terrified and concerned,
As you can see, the blues.
some kid looking
Now we're going to do the trim on the waist armor.
Telling police Myers is not only one of his neighbors, he knows them, eaten dinner at their table.
So you know the family.
You know the whole family.
Is there anything you want me to tell the family?
If Mike takes it or takes swings, you know, I might back him. That's my only flaw. Not fair.
This morning, relationship is confirmed for the first time when Bob Myers later addresses the press.
Okay.
How bad is it? What do you think? What do you think?
Myers claiming his wife and mentor troubled view.
My wife paid countless dollars at that car to console this man.
Now I need to put a little bit more down because
Dad used to keep him.
it's not quite enough down there for this. I don't think I'm going to be able to finish this guy tonight, or at least not on the broadcast. Because once the broadcast is over, all I'll probably really need to do is the fingers and the base. The base I tend to leave for last. I am informed by some sources that that is the mark of an amateur. I'm like, then why is it that almost every painter I see painting does the base last? Now, a true pro, the figure would not be on the base yet. The figure would be just on a cocktail stick under each foot. Okay, just a little bit more.
One person that bears the weight of thousands. We contort ourselves to fit inside those letters. A beautiful little breath. 15 died. Millions.
And right there.
Real, ordinary, messy.
Okay. That's all the blue that's going to be on there. Now, again, dry brush over wash looks dusty and dirty. Wash over dry brush looks wet and clean. So, we're going to do the wash before the dry brush because we want a distinction between the areas of the blue on his underarms and elbow and that, and the shiny of the armor. To practice, well, that entirely depends. If you're wanting miniatures to... do you mind? Do you mind? Yeah. Anyway, if you're wanting to learn all of the basic techniques, you know, dry brush. Oh, dry brushing, wash, etc. Probably, and also faces. I'm not sure. I would think that one of the best options would probably be the old plastic High Elf Spearman from Games Workshop. You would dry brush on the scales, you would do washes on the cloth, and it's got enough of a face visible to really get some practice in. If you mean learning how to use specific techniques for the type of figure you're going to be painting, well, then one of the ones you're going to be painting. For example, I have over here, there he is, a plastic Space Marine. Obviously, I haven't even primed him yet. The thing about a Space Marine, 90% of the Space Marine will be this color if I make him an Ultramarine, because he's Ultramarine blue. But he would not be a good idea for learning to paint, because he'd only be a good idea for learning to paint sci-fi armor, because 90% of them sci-fi armor. This guy would not be a good figure for learning to paint, simply because he's 90% armor. Let me see what happens if I... Okay. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and curse the autofocus again. We're going to go ahead. Yeah, this lighting is really. There we go. On the blues, oh, that's too little. There we go. On the blues, we're going to go ahead and do a wash, then a dry brush. And the wash is very simple. Again, for a army painter, blue tone. Now, I can tell you this will look a lot better in sunlight. It will look a lot better in daylight. I don't know if you look, like right here in the image, you'll see that it's trying to deal. Let's see what happens if I come up here. No, that's not going to work. Yeah. Anyway, it's going to take some of this and we're going to put it into a divot, because it's liquid and not cream. You'll hear people bandy about phrases like, your wash should have a milk-like consistency. And I say bullshit. Because the consistency of your wash will be different for every color you use. You've got to either know that particular paint, or you've got to dip it in and brush it across a piece of paper to see how dark it's getting. So while some might be, milk might be a good example for a wash, for others, milk would not be thin enough, and still others, milk would be a little too thin. Although that's rare. And even then, when they say milky consistency, do they mean whole milk, 2% skim, because skim is pretty close to water.
Their relationship, or if that's separate, that's totally on the outside.
But anyway, like I said, every paint, and I don't mean every paint brand, I mean every color, has a different opacity. Because it's got a different opacity, it's going to have a different point at which it needs to be. It becomes thin enough to wash with and thick enough to settle well and actually affect the paint below it. I would say that the closest equivalent to this blue shade in Games Workshop is probably Drakenhof Nightshade. I have never used it. I have heard that this blue shade is a little bit less saturated in color than the Drakenhof. Okay. And now, once again, we let that dry. Now, one thing you'll notice about the Army Painter paints and the Viejo paints. And for the Viejo, this applies to Model Color, Game Color, Model Air, the Mecha set. Yes, they have a Mecha set.
For years I thought I was lactose intolerant. Turns out I was just sensitive to a protein commonly found in milk.
The Mecha colors, this line, is virtually identical in consistency to the Model Air. And it's a little shiny. But, for all intents and purposes, the only difference between them is the Viejo have rounded top and bottom edges, where the Army Painter has a sharp top and a rounded bottom. Viejo also claims 17 milliliters. Army Painter claims 18. But really and truly, that just means that Army Painter probably is filling them a little bit more full. Anyway, while this dries, I need to decide on a dry brush shade for this. Definitely not electric blue or void shield blue. So I'm going to look up here. Do I have a blue that's a good... I need... Where is it? Yeah, here it is. Crystal blue. As you can see, well, it's once again harder to tell. The label tells a better story. This is going to be a very light dry brush, only on the absolute edges, because being detail areas, we don't need them to be as extreme in brain fry. Oh, come on. Autofocus back on. As extreme in contrast as the armor or the flesh. Now, again, this will be just a dry brush. Just a tiny, small amount of paint will be needed. So we're just going to put it at this spot on the palette. Just a dollop. Now, with the dyeing brush, we're going ahead and incorporating it into the army of dry brushing. Dry brush it off onto this piece of paper, and very lightly, just very lightly brush it across the exposed area. Okay, now we can't do the shoulder yet because there's still a puddle on the shoulder, on the right shoulder. Now, up here,
This year, we're taking it up a notch.
So in this commercial, we see two travelers in a comforting with a glow around them. So people watching will be like, wow, maybe I'll glow too if I book direct at choicehotels.com. Who glows? Just say bada book, bada boom. Nobody glows. He gets it. Always the lowest price guaranteed. Book now at choicehotels.com.
okay. Now, like I said, we're going to have to wait a minute for the other shoulder to dry. If it doesn't dry soon, we're just going to go ahead and withdraw the puddle. But you can see it's now a bit more clear blue. You can see the shine right in here. That means that ink is not yet dry there. The other thing we're going to do, so we can go ahead and do this while we're waiting. On the scale, we want to really emphasize the scales. So we're going to go ahead. We're not using my mix, but we're using Nuln Oil on those hip scales. And we're just going to go over the scales. We want to exaggerate its depth a whole lot more. And there. Really pick out, really make those scales pop. And in all honesty, that's probably going to be about the last thing we can do on this broadcast because we only have 8 minutes left. Now when you close that bottle, make sure all of the edge, front and back, closes. I hate these pots. Okay, now, whee! Odds are on, oh wait, there it is, on odds are on Sunday I will be doing a sculpt, not a paint. So, let me...
If that Ford hadn't been honest, none of this probably would have happened. It's full-on road rage. Silver car pulls in front of the Myers. Russell says the driver bucks out, lost quarter mile.
Okay, anyway. You'll notice that half the paints are missing over here because they're on my tablet. Now, this is a bit more, well, it's shining blue from the screen in the center of the chest, but this is closer to how it actually looks than what you've been seeing. Now, if you look at this sword, you'll see what I did actually carried over through that metallic shading. And the same thing with this sword. No, there's no way I can show that quickly. There's 51 bottles of paint in the Army Painter box. And I had a couple other extra Army Painters that I bought since then. And then just doing the math. This is, that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 17 times 3 is 51. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 13, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 83. 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, with a couple random extra bottles. So it's right now about half and half between Vallejo and Army Painter. Yeah, there's over 100 bottles. And that's not even counting the bottles I mixed myself. And I'll be honest, as time goes on, and I add, this needs to be done here. No, this needs to be here. Yeah. As time goes on and I add my own paints, my own mixes, like that armor wash and that metal, the metal one, then, you never know. No, there's literally nothing that is impossible to do by hand. There are a lot of things that are easier to do with an airbrush, but there is literally nothing that is impossible by hand. Go figure. Probably one of the easiest things to do with an airbrush, as opposed to doing it by hand, would be, let's say you had one of those big old Firebirds, the plastic Firebirds about that long, or wingspan like that, and that long beak to tail, and you wanted to make it go through shades of red. Infinitely easier with just with your airbrush. But you could do it with a paintbrush. You'd just be sitting there doing wet blending for a very long time. There are some things that are much easier to do with a brush instead of an airbrush. For example, his belt buckle. Practically impossible to do with an airbrush. Oh, excuse me. Oh. I'm an idiot. I mentioned I'd printed 6 on the flat bases, and I couldn't find one. Number 6. Well, I paint on primer, and really and truly, the primer surface is the same, whether it's PLA or resin. But I have not noticed any difference in how the primer adheres to resin over PLA. Oh, excuse me. However, I have noticed that paint directly on PLA isn't quite as stable as paint on resin. Yet another reason for the photon. But yeah, this. Now that we have gotten that puddle dried, thank God, the puddle in the shoulder is gone. So I can go ahead and with one last brush stroke for tonight, dry brush in that bit of the shoulder while I'm thinking about it.
Crystal is coping the best way she knows how, through music.
You say that you've actually written a song.
Yeah, I did.
Do you mind singing a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, he's done. Now, well, not done, but he's done for tonight. And just to give y'all a clue on scale, I'm going to go ahead and pull out unpainted Valandar the Red Mark I sculpt. As you can see, they're not that much taller per se, but they are considerably heavier in build. A good bit chunkier. And they are 32 millimeter. There, that puts the top of the base even with the bottom of his foot. They are 32 millimeter, meaning that from the ground to the eye is 32 millimeters. They honestly look a lot larger until you put them next to a figure, because they're so much broader than the regular figure. They're also ever so slightly larger and bulkier than the orc horde that I did on Thingiverse. The smallest model I have ever made, primed, and painted, or just made in general? The smallest model I've ever made. There is a frog on my CR10. Let me see if I can find where that particular
And where is he now? We were able to determine that he had fled the DP area.
We are distributing this photograph as widely as possible. Amend
Alright, let me see if I can find it. Surfing through all my images is rough. Here he is.
Welcome to 2020 on On. I'm John Quinones. It was a crime so horrific it grabbed national interest.
Now, what was this called?
After evidence had been examined and assessed,
Frog's print. Okay, let me see if I can find where I put that in my
inside the house of Amy and Subway
directory.
for almost 20 hours. Did the killer act?
Add source, media file.
Why would someone target this man? As Ryan Smith first reported in 2015, it is a story of lives intertwined, simmering rage, and a tragic...
Okay, 10012718.
It wasn't supposed to be like this. Two teenage sisters mourning their murdered parents and little brother. Their multi-million-dollar home.
Yeah, these were done on a CR10. That purple thing they're sitting on is a cigarette lighter. That is the smallest I have printed to date. And it's smaller than anything I've ever printed on the Photon. Teeny tiny. Now, it could be said Yeah. Yep. Now it could be said that, hold on a second, let me look up here. That technically whoa. Yeah. Technically these guys. Alright, let's do it manually. Roger. These are so small that there's more, the hair is from dust. Again, these were printed on the CR10. But I don't consider the individual figures on that print. I'm 49 years old. Yes, I've played Frogger. Both the arcade version and the Atari 2600 version. And the Apple II Plus version. Didn't I, little buddy? Yeah. Whoosh. Yes. Uh-oh. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're only gonna get you got your toe caught. Oh. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hmm.
You notice that as soon as you walk in the neighborhood, now you see Embassy, it's just a block away, and Joe Biden's home. It's not more than a mile away from where they live. And that's just one of us.
And notice that despite how much he's stretching those claws, the second he feels my skin, he pulls them in. Yeah. Alright. Meanwhile, I gotta go. So, let me go ahead and put you... Fuzz butt? No. You gotta go down on the ground. Okay, now shoo, Fuzz. I'm gonna go ahead and do my usual with the left hand countdown 5 to 1. Green Tide is coming soon. Basically, I gotta get all these guys painted and more printed and painted, and I've got to get some photographs taken of them. Anyway, I also have to make a video. Always gotta make a video. What are you doing, little baby girl? Yeah. Anyway, hand up, countdown. Ready? Okay. That's going to be a 5, a 4, a 3, 2, and a 1. Miniac, if you're watching this, I am painting more minis.